Well, hello and welcome to the second in our new series of Our Say Digital Democracy interviews. I'm Tracy Hutchison. Our guest today is Victoria's Minister for Local Government, Natalie Hutchins. Labor was elected in the state last year with a clear mandate to make local government more efficient and accountable to ratepayers. The most significant policy to achieve this is rate capping, setting future rate rises at CPI. Well, this would effectively limit rate rises to less than half the recent average rise in many municipalities. The minister's in the final phases of working out the details of how the policy will be implemented after asking for a report from the Essential Services Commission. Well, not surprisingly, the reaction to rate capping has been polarised, and this has been also reflected in the Our Say forum. Cheers from ratepayers and predictions of doom from those who work in local councils. Well, today Minister Hutchins is going to answer the three top questions submitted by you and voted on by you, the Our Say community. We got 89 questions, 681 people voted and 83 people commented on those questions. Well, Minister, good evening and thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Tracy.
Now, I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look at the Our Say forum as part of the Our Say Ask series, but I think it's pretty fair to say that there's a gulf between what local government actually thinks of itself and what the community thinks of what it's doing. So let's get down to business. And our first question is from Michelle June, who's not a supporter at all of rate capping, and I'm going to read her question to you. Due to the proposed introduction of rate capping, many councils are getting out of childcare and home care. These jobs will go to private enterprise and not-for-profits, which employ staff on the award. Now, women who continue to work in these industries will experience significant pay cuts, says Michelle, as well as loss of conditions and entitlements such as paid parental leave, flexible working arrangements and family violence leave, which enables them to participate in the workforce. This will increase the gender pay gap, says Michelle. How can the government, your government, introduce rate capping when you claim to support gender pay equity and also oppose family violence?
Well, let me just say straight up front, Tracy, of course we are massive supporters of pay equity for women and very much at the forefront of leading policy around Australia in trying to end violence against women. And we've done so by obviously undertaking the Royal Commission inquiry into family violence, but also putting our money where our mouth is and putting some policies in place so that there is family violence leave available for public sector workers. We expect that that will flow on to other sectors. In terms of local government, currently there are many services delivered, very, very good services delivered by local government, and we anticipate that those services will continue. And we anticipate that even the programs that are supported by local government to end family violence will continue. And if councils choose to get out of those sort of services, well, they'll be answerable to their own communities. We're not looking at affecting current budgets and the current services that councils provide, but rather how much they can put their rates up in the future.
I think what Michelle is saying is how much choice councils will ultimately be afforded if they're hit with these sorts of rate capping that will compromise their ability to provide those services. So she's basically saying two things. That rate capping will mean local government will have to get out of delivering some of those services like home and community care because they're not going to be able to subsidise them from the general rates. And also, Michelle's saying that councils have been groundbreakers, providing really important and progressive working conditions for women in particular, yet these changes will more than likely put those very women out of work. Is that what you want to do?
Oh, absolutely not. And I will stand up to any council that chooses that path of ending those services and putting local government workers out of work. And I would challenge the Australian Services Union to do the same and take that up. There have been, unfortunately, councils that have made the decisions due to budgetary requirements or their own leadership decisions in past years to get out of delivering such services. That is very much in the minority. There's still a majority of councils that are delivering those good services, and we would continue to support those councils and those councils that make the decision and choose to get out of such essential services to their local communities. Well, they will actually face the music come election time as to whether they've made the right decisions or not.
So what you're saying there is that you as local government minister and your government, the Andrews government in Victoria, very much want to see councils continuing to deliver the health and community care that they currently deliver.
Yes, we absolutely would love to see councils doing that, and we continue to support councils in a range of grants in order to do that and encourage them to continue on doing that. We're not looking to affect the current bottom line. What we're doing is saying that they need to be transparent to their local ratepayers and be sensible about the way that they're raising their rates in the future.
Councils have worked very hard to move beyond the roads, rates and rubbish mantra that we associate with local council service delivery. You committed there that you want the health and community care services to continue. What about then things like youth services, economic development, urban renewal, community arts programs, the sorts of things that may be considered discretionary in the minds of some people? Are you happy then, as a consequence, to see those services go?
Look, local government is an independent tier of government. There's no doubt about that. Every community is different. There are 79 councils across Victoria. The needs of each community is different. I will not, as minister, impose what services should and shouldn't be delivered by each council. I think that is up to the local community to demand what is essential in their areas and to make sure that they have a say on a yearly basis through the budget process.
Communities are very diverse around the state, and I guess you're, as minister, you are though being prescriptive about the amount of money that councils are going to have available to them. In some local communities, the kinds of services that we're talking about are absolutely critical to the health and wellbeing of those communities, but you're going to cut their budgets.
I'd absolutely reject the premise of that question in terms of we're going to cut their budgets.
You're putting a cap on their capacity to generate revenue.
Their current budgets will exist. It will be about how much they can go up by in the future, because for the last 15 years we've seen a 6% average increase every year, year upon year. We've actually seen some councils go as high as 10, 11, 12%. Without justifying it back to their local community. So we're trying to put a system in place that says you need to be transparent. If you want to put your rates up above CPI, you need to justify what the money is going to. And I think that's where ratepayers feel that they've been left out in years past.
So you wouldn't put any credence, for example, a local council that indicates to its community and to you as minister that it can no longer afford, for example, to implement some really important youth programs or community urban renewal programs, or the sort of programs that many communities look to engage young people in particular, give them a sense of purpose. What about if a council comes to you and says, well, look, we're getting less revenue, we can't afford to do that, but it's actually going to, kick us from behind because we're going to leave those people behind?
I think what ratepayers want to see is councils addressing the wasteful spending first, and then to ensure that they are delivering those key services. And I'd be very surprised if a council made a decision to cut, for example, as you mentioned, youth services, if that was a real need in the community. Really what we want to see is if there's any wasteful spending. What
is wasteful spending? I mean, this is a really good opportunity in your mind because you've been looking at this really closely, and you've been elected on this platform that you believe that in local councils there's wasteful spending. What is it? What have you seen?
Well, there have been a range of things. Depending on the council, there are pretty extravagant overseas trips that occur for both councillors, mayors, senior staff. There are pretty exorbitant salaries that are happening that are not necessarily transparent to the community amongst councils. And then there are individual programs that are being run by councils that may not hit the mark to the local need. One that comes to mind was an online website that allowed residents to talk to trees and get a response.
Which council was that?
The City of Melbourne. Obviously, they have a much different budget to most other councils, and perhaps they would argue that they could afford that. That, in many ratepayers' minds, might be a waste of council resources.
Well, just on that, you've repeatedly said that you want local government to stick to its knitting, to deliver the core services. Yeah. You've articulated really clearly that you don't believe that rate capping will impact in any way on those core services. Is that an absolute commitment from you as local government minister?
Well, look, the other thing that we're doing is actually launching a website quite shortly called Know Your Council, which will measure those core services and deliverables by each council and give ratepayers an opportunity to do a comparison between like councils. I think that putting that out there and having the conversation about what is the core service to that community. I can't prescribe to 79 different communities across Victoria what is the core services that they need, but they know what they need, and giving them an opportunity to have a say and have a council that is transparent is extremely important.
Well, the Minister for Local Government, Natalie Hutchins, is with us on this Our Say forum. Let's go to our next question. And our second questioner is Chan Chia. Now, Chan, Minister, has asked a very long question, so I'll just précis it. The core thing is around the lack of transparency in local government, the notion that there are large cash surpluses that councils sit on, which might indicate that rates are in fact too high, and an overall lack of accountability to ratepayers. Now, he's clearly singing from the songbook. For you, you've got a big fan here. Do you agree that there's a culture of a lack of accountability and a resistance to change in the local government sector from your experience?
Look, I wouldn't say overwhelmingly a resistance to change. I would say that there are some councils, mayors, councillors, CEOs that are a little bit critical of a new fair go rate system coming in and probably a little bit worried about what it means to their communities. And that's why we're going through the process of building a new fair go rate system that's not a off-the-shelf package from another state, but that what's going to best serve our state and give the flexibilities for councils that want to perhaps invest in some one-off infrastructure to be able to do that in amongst a new fair go rate system.
Chan is a woman, and my apologies, reading off a script, so my apologies. Well, let's I guess extrapolate a little bit more on the questions on the issues that she's raised. One of the common accusations made against councils is that they sit on those very large cash surpluses and land holdings. Councils, of course, have to lodge all their financial reports. Is that perception that there are these slush funds, the large land holdings, is that reflected in the information that your department receives from local councils?
Oh, look, unfortunately, there's quite diverse budgets across the 79 councils, and when I say unfortunately, there are some councils that are financially struggling due to lack of population, drop of population in their areas, and unfortunately, rate capping is not going to fix that problem because they have not been actually increasing their rates above CPI for many years. They've got different problems, which certainly as a state government we need to assist in addressing them. But there are big councils that are continuing to grow, that are continuing to put up their rates at unreasonable levels, and the new system is about saying you need to peg it to CPI and you need to justify if you need to go above that.
But there are those perceptions, Minister, surely you'd agree, that councils have inflated rates and that they sit on large amounts of money and they've got vast tracts of land that they hold on to as well. Is that borne out in the information coming to your department?
One of the reasons we asked the Essential Services Commission to get involved in doing this is because they have the capacity to do the analysis about what is it that councils have a capacity to either borrow or further utilise their current resources, whether that be land holdings or others. And they're the things that will be taken into consideration when councils ask for an exemption to put their rates above CPI rate capping.
All right. Well, just talk about that exemption, because that's a bit of a kicker, really, in terms of the policy and how it might, in real terms, be implemented. How would you like to see that rate exemption process work? Say, I guess, particularly for small shires that are often struggling at the best of times.
Yeah, unfortunately for some of those small shires that are really not doing so well financially, putting their rates up is actually not the answer for them, because their populations are declining and their population capacity to earn is actually declining as well due to an ageing population in many areas. So that's about looking at alternative sources of income for those councils rather than...
What are they though? What are the alternate sources of incomes if you've got an ageing population and you've got a low population?
Well, there might be alternatives, and that's what we need to look at with the review of the Local Government Act, but there also might be capacity for some shared services, shared professional services between those councils, and how they can get ahead, in a sense, financially in better delivering for their local communities as well. So
the exemptions are going to apply to the smaller struggling councils, not the big urban councils.
Look, there might be capacity within the new system, and I'm not preempting the report of the Essential Services Commission, but there might be capacity for some of those growth areas who may not have the money coming through from their rates in time to build essential community facilities, to be able to look at a short-term exemption in order to build a one-off infrastructure investment.
It does sound like some of the smaller councils might inadvertently be starved of funds, while other areas are going to be able to qualify under those exemptions, and you're going to really, I guess, disadvantage some areas that perhaps are already disadvantaged.
Well, I wouldn't say the new system's going to starve them of funds, because the new system is about pegging rates into the future, not affecting their current budget levels. However, as I acknowledged before, those councils are financially struggling now, and I don't think that the Fair Go rate system is going to be a hindrance to them in any way, shape or form. In fact, we're really focused with this on those councils that have been putting their rates up way beyond the 6%, way beyond CPI year after year.
All right, Minister, there's been a lot of talk in the sector about the proposed efficiency dividend that you're planning to introduce, as well as the rate cap, which would compound over time with no ceiling. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, look, that's a recommendation that has been floated by the Essential Services Commission, not necessarily one that has been adopted by government yet, but we need to look at all of the options. And the realities is the major utilities across the state, major businesses, banks, they all have efficiency dividends.
Do you think it's a good idea?
I think it's something we need to look at, and I think ratepayers have probably expected their councils can get more efficient over time. Whether that's a recommendation we accept as a government is yet to be decided.
So should an efficiency dividend, by its very nature and by the other rules that you're putting in place around capping, should an efficiency dividend also be capped?
Oh, potentially, but we're talking about a very, very low bar that's been recommended by the Essential Services Commission. We're talking about a saving in the second year of this system operating of 5 cents for every dollar. 5 cents for every $100. So these are not huge savings, but they're a start to getting councils on track to looking at how they can better manage themselves.
You've mentioned a couple of times when we were talking about the smaller councils that might qualify for some exemptions in terms of the kind of rate capping that they may or may not need to introduce, about how those services might be shared, that you might look at reviewing how some councils actually function across the state. Is this really about putting council amalgamations, those dreaded super councils, back on the agenda, which won't play well with some of the ALP's key stakeholders, I guess the 50,000 council employees, or their union for that matter, the Australian Services Union, which has quite a bit of clout in your party?
Look, certainly council amalgamations is not on our agenda.
Is it not?
No, it's not.
Local councils are all talking about it. They're really...
Oh, well, unless a council comes to us with a plan that they want to move down this track, then certainly we would consider it, but it's not at the forefront of our agenda. We have a pretty big agenda in local government between a Fair Go rate system, reviewing the Local Government Act, which will actually have capacity to look at the ways councils can better share their services. There's no doubt about that. But certainly it's not a number one agenda. It was not even on our agenda to look at that unless councils come to us with a plan.
Well, what about if this current review actually comes back to you and says, look, actually, Minister, we think there's a whole tract of councils that would be better served by having sharing some of those services, and in fact we could tweak a few things around there and they could share their administration. Is it not the thin end of the wedge in terms of of going down that path? It's been done before in Victoria.
I think the most important thing is that the councils involved would have to support that and come to us with that sort of plan. There might be better efficiency findings that come through or suggestions that come through the review of the Local Government Act, but without those councils that we're directly talking about being on board, it's not something that we would go, but as a priority, go down that track.
Well, the Minister, Natalie Hutchins, the Minister for Local Government in Victoria, is with us on this Our Say Forum. And we're going to our third and last question now, Minister, and it's from Edward Gordon. And I'll read this one from the submission paper. Edwin says, what can you do about executive paychecks in councils, Minister? Some of these bureaucrats are earning more than cabinet ministers, arguably with less responsibility. Will you also use your role as IR Minister to do the hard negotiation with the public sector unions? What do you say?
Well, firstly and foremostly, councils actually manage their own staff. It's not the state government's role to do the negotiations on behalf of each council for their local EBA.
It's not, but you are the Minister and you do hold a bit of sway.
And look, I'd be very interested in helping and assisting, but not taking over that space on behalf of councils. If they asked for assistance, I'd be more than happy to provide it. But at the end of the day, it's about the one-on-one respect between local management and their workforce. And I think those important negotiations need to happen at a local level. There's certainly potentially clauses that are common to all councils that could be included in EBAs, and I'd be happy to support that going forward. But really, it's the role of the chief executive officer of each council to have a team that heads up those negotiations, and the Australian Services Union and other unions involved to be at the table negotiating.
They're often the ones with the greatest vested interest, though. If it's the chief executive who is the most highly remunerated amongst the council staff, I mean, is that necessarily the best person to be actually making those decisions? And certainly it echoes a number of comments that you've made today in our forum, but also since coming into government. I mean, do you have a view about what an appropriate salary might be for a Metro chief executive in a local council?
Well, look, my view is that they should be transparent in their pay scales and what they earn. And
well, I think they are, and they're really high.
Well, some aren't, unfortunately. Some are still kind of kept out of the public eye. And really, it's up to the local community to ask the question, are we getting value for money out of our CEO? One thing I'm looking forward to as Minister is launching the Know Your Council website shortly, which will actually look at the services each council delivers and will give communities an opportunity to say, are we getting value for money out of our leadership in our local council?
Well, you've mentioned it twice today, so you're certainly well on message, and I'm looking forward to having a look at it too. But just in terms of, I mean, we have been talking about capping, we have been talking about efficiency reviews, we have been talking about all those sorts of things. Should there be a cap then on the number of senior executive staff at various salary bands? Would that be a recommendation that you'd like to see implemented?
It's certainly going to be a hot topic in reviewing the Local Government Act, which is currently underway. The Local Government Act was created 25 years ago and has been subject to almost 100 changes over that time. One thing that was not really targeted when the Act was written was around remuneration of senior staff. So that if that is something that we get a bit of a groundswell during that review, then certainly that might be something we need to look at.
I'm curious too, because I mean, I think it is a really big issue for people at local council level, particularly when you might see the job advertised for the local chief executive and think, crikey, that must be a great job, going to all those morning teas. With all due respect to chief executives who are in local councils, but I'm just wondering if there's appropriate relativities between what a local government executive earns with their perhaps state and federal counterparts. I mean, do you think that then there should be some sort of universal tiered system there that is transparent, that everyone knows what band levels people are working on in those areas?
Look, I think it's fair to say that both elected positions of mayors and councillors could be connected to state and federal counterparts, but certainly when you're looking at CEOs of councils and senior leadership positions, you're actually comparing to the private sector rather than the government sector, and that's where councils are competing to get, I guess, the skills and the talent from that pool of an executive range in general business.
One of the many things that you've talked about since becoming Minister, Minister Hutchins, is councillor conduct.
Yes.
And how councils should behave, the protocols that should be in place at council meetings, in public. What sorts of, I guess, recommendations or behavioural codes would you like to see implemented then?
We actually have some legislation before the Parliament now. It's passed through the lower house in the last week of sitting, about to go into the upper house, which is overhauling some of that governance and behaviours of councillors. Unfortunately, it was something that couldn't wait till the review of the Local Government Act was completed, because we do have council elections next year and we need to address some of these issues. As I said, the Act's 25 years old. When it was written, social media wasn't even part of our lives, and most of, unfortunately, some of the misconduct that has happened, most of it has happened with the use of social media, and therefore there are some loopholes in the way that I guess councillor behaviour is governed by the Act. So we have had to bring some changes forward to try and address this issue. In the main, councillors do a great job. They give up a lot of time. Unfortunately, there have been a few that have breached what is the council's code of conduct, and that code of conduct is set by a local council, not by the state government. It's set by the local council. Councillors are meant to sign up to that code of conduct and behave according to that. Some of them have breached that, and we've had some pretty serious cases in the last 12 months. And unfortunately, the Act doesn't allow me as Minister to stand down an individual councillor. In fact, it encourages me with that sort of behaviour to stand down the entire council, and I don't think that is fair. I don't think that's fair to democracy. And particularly when other councillors are working very hard and you have one bad apple that is really spoiling it for the others.
What about, so in Darebin, for example, in Melbourne's north, there's a couple of monitors in place with that council, and I think we've only got one local council that's still under administration, that's Brimbank. How do you, what does that mean? What does that say, I guess? What does that reflect if you're putting monitors in place to monitor the behaviour and you've still got a council under administration?
Well, certainly we're hoping to improve the behaviour, the governance and the administration where we put a monitor in. And we've done that with a set time limit of 3 months. So we're hoping to see improvements there. The last thing I want to do as Minister is to put a council into administration. I want to try and remedy any problem that we can before we get to that point. There is in fact 2 councils that are in administration at the moment. Wangaratta is the other. That is a classic example of a couple of bad apples that forced that council, because those individuals couldn't be stood down or dealt with in a timely manner. It then saw the whole council go into administration. We want to make sure that we get the system right so that that doesn't happen in the future.
What would you describe as, I guess, the ideal relationship between a council and its administration, its own kind of organisation? How do you imagine that working in an ultimate way?
Well, I think firstly that the elected representatives understand what their roles are, what their rights are, what their responsibilities are and the boundaries. Signing a code of conduct helps spell that out, and it's my view, as it is many people that I've had this discussion with, is that councillors, once elected, should be forced to sign that code of conduct as a recognition before they're sworn in, and that's one of the small changes that we're making. But they also need to know what the relationship is between an elected councillor and the staff of that council. Unfortunately, we've had issues of bullying over the last few years in a range of councils, and some of that comes from individual councillors pressuring officers for particular opinions or information, and they're the things that we can stamp out through code of conduct.
Quick yes/no question, if you would. Brimbank and Wangaratta both under administration. Will they enjoy local council elections next year?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, Minister, it's been a terrific half hour on something of a sleeper issue which will no doubt grow as an issue in the community. Thank you for joining us. And thank you too to the Our Say community for participating in this lively forum, and we hope you got the answers to your questions. Our next guest will be the man tasked with fixing Melbourne's traffic problems, John Merritt from VicRoads. The forum is now open for you to ask a question at oursay.org/community/VicRoads. And I'll be talking to him on the 26th of October. Thank you to Swinburne University for its support in allowing Our Say to use its studio facilities. This program will be available as video on demand, so please find it on YouTube and share it with your friends. But for now, thanks for having us. Good night.